All right, this is called a single leg dumbbell deadlift. Seems to be all the exercises I'm choosing these really long names, which makes me or remind me that when you're writing exercises for clients, you may want to have your own PDF printout of exercises and what's the wording called, like the shorthand for what they are. So this one would be great if clients start to understand SL DB RDL. Do you see that? Single leg dumbbell Romanian deadlift. By writing that out, you can see it's going to cause just so much confusion. So in a couple of biggest patterns or things to remember, why you're going to be doing it, and then some tweaks and fixes and cues on how to make it effective for individuals. In a lot of cases, due to the instability of bending for single leg, especially with the dumbbell, it's going to be in large part a motor control or motor activity exercise, okay? And even as the training of the individual gets higher and higher, there's so many movements at play when people do it, when they do bend with load, that it really is, you're trying to create motor control of the entire movement. So just remember those principles that whenever it's unstable, so if I'm standing on one leg and I need to bend over and using dumbbells in my hand, you can imagine that I can load that up and make it look challenging, but it's going to turn into shortened range of motion and me trying to shorten my base of support over my center of mass, and it's actually not going to become an unstable exercise. So again, like other exercises you've seen me do with single leg or single arm activity, the more unstable it is, the less intensive it can become. So that doesn't make it wrong, it just means that you want to place this exercise in the correct area, knowing that it's done for motor control and right to left balance. Some major things to think about for the movement is that it is a bending exercise, even at the hip. So for both sides, you want to have what you would be considered balanced mechanics of right to left bending. Secondly, if I can do it in more or less a picture, you know, your pelvis is going to still rotate forward and backwards. Now, it is natural for it to slightly turn and rotate down and over as that femur flex within the hip socket, but you just want to recognize that you're going to ask the client in through that movement to make sure that that pelvic position and their lumbar spine stays flat, so you can tell them just to envision their bum cheeks and their low back staying in a congruent method the whole time as they bend. And you can even give them an instance of what's not like that. So I'll give you an example. So this would be a good packing position. I'll try to keep my balance as much as possible when I do it. And this would not be. Well, you see, I can't even maintain it with a shitty movement. So I'll try to do a shitty movement again and to not maintain that. So you can see as I'm bending over, this hip is falling down. Can you catch that? Did we catch that? Okay, awesome. So what you're trying to do is to make sure that I'm still bending and stooping with that same action, even though I'm only doing with one leg. So describe that as to what you're looking for. Third, in terms of the work that's acting upon the movement, remember that I'm going to have load in my hand. So if I'm having load in my hand, remember as I do a stooping pattern or a bending pattern, this entire chain has to work, right, to stabilize and make sure I'm doing the eccentric activity effectively. But you got to remember that this pelvis has to stay straight, right? I have to flex fully at that hip equally to the right side when I do it. And I also cannot have any rotation or imbalance in protraction, retraction of my upper back. Because you can just imagine if I had, you know, one arm that wanted to dip lower, right? You can imagine if I had that going on my right leg, and then on my left leg I had the same thing. I'm now creating this rotation through my upper back. That's not creating a good patterning from right to left, if that's what our goal is for balance. So when people do it right to left side, if I can do it face on so you can try to focus on it, and I'll use somewhat moderately heavy dumbbells in order to show the exercise. A couple things to think about, or three of them that I said. Pelvis tips. I want the same hip flexion on one side than the other when I do it, and I want to make sure I don't have any, when I'm in that bending pattern, I don't want any rotation more left, right to left side. Now, I don't want you to be teaching it as a robotic exercise. It's obvious that human movement is going to have some perturbations and variance, right? But you want to get the client to try to perfect that movement over time. So as you know, when people are starting movement patterns, it looks like this, and then it starts to look like this, and then it starts to look perfect, right? So our goal is to get to that point where those imbalances in that is successful. So those are the three. The fourth one to think about is the foot position and the balance of that foot from right to left. Now, arguably the foot mechanics and how they sit on the ground and their forces and how they work in stabilizing and creating mobility around the joint is going to allow perfect execution of movement. But we'll just say it's one of the four. So when that foot is in place, you want, and I would just say it in layman's terms, equality from right to left side in how the person balances. So in a lot of cases, you're going to pick out which side you should work on first from possibly a side bridge, where you may get fatigue on one side or the other, possibly a Trendelenburg or a knee rise test, possibly a split stance, or possibly a lying hip extension activity, a hip extension test, where people lie down and they take their leg off. You will see right to left balance. So you want to have the, let's call it the less stable hip that you're going to be putting on the ground first to be challenged, meaning that, you know, this hip is working as this foot is on the ground. I want to work this guy first, or this side. So what you're trying to focus on is that big toe not being too active, but somewhat of a clawing to the ground. And you want to make sure that the client has this awareness of whatever they have for their arch of their foot is being active. So you just want to promote the big toe being used in an active foot. You can get really specific as to what that's going to look like, but make sure you get that from right to left. So in this atmosphere, we get a soft floor and dumbbells and I'm all alone. It makes it fairly easy, right? So if you're prescribing this to people in a gym and there's a lot of other shit that's going on around it, take safety into consideration. But it would be best practiced, ironically, with this exercise with no shoes, because the foot can then be active in making sure that it's not just stabilizing against an unstable shoe when they do it, okay? So that's the fourth thing. I'll go through them again. You have to have equal right to left bending, right to left side. That pelvis has to stay the same the entire time, and we cannot have rotation or protraction, retraction differences as they do it, and you want to have an active and stable foot when people do it, okay? In terms of tempo, it's really based upon the individual, but I'd rather individuals progress with one leg first, you know, and get that leg taken care of in repetitions. So as an example, I have a right glute or right hip component that I want to create some stability on. I'm going to do right leg deadlifts first, right? And this may not be the speed, but just give you an indication what it's going to be like. I'm going to do all my repetitions on that side. Now I'm going to take a break. Why am I taking a break? Because I still had to use my core and my brain to do that entire right side. So if I did all right side and then took a 5-second break and did all left side, now my whole core and brain could be slightly more tired as I try to learn that left side pattern. So do the right side pattern, give yourself a little breather, and then do the left side pattern. As people progress to balance, so when you feel, and this is nebulous term, but when you feel that that person has great hip balance, it is at that point where you can prescribe alternating. So alternating, I'll try my best to try to be stable. Single leg RDL, single leg dumbbell RDL. I can't even get the exercise name right. Right to left side would look like this. So I'm trying to make sure I have an active foot right to left. And I'm working really hard on my right based upon my own previous experiences on my right side, having to really think about it. So you can see that over time, when someone develops that right to left balance, you can give them alternating ones, because then it's just like walking lunges. And that would resemble, definitely, I'm going to take some breaks between my words here. That would resemble a lot more functional patterns, right? Because just think about it, for a lot of people in functional patterns, running, walking up and down stairs, in and out of cars and doing movement, you're going to use right-left leg patterning, right? It's just a primal activity. So going right to left alternating really is built into our system. So our goal is to get people to that. Time under tension, when you're doing single leg activity, is generally no pauses at the top. That's the only thing you want to focus on. So unless someone has really poor control, you want to make sure that there's no pause at the top. Why no pause at the top? Well, there's no work for the muscle, right? So if you wanted to create any pausing in the movement, you can create a pause down here. They can even tap the ground if they want, right? I want to create a pause here. Why? This is the most challenging position, right? where my center of mass is the furthest away, right, from that lever, and so I want to make sure that I'm being challenged here. I can create a pause or some kind of control here. But when I stand up, I don't want to be resting here. I want to get back into that tension that's going to be applied and carry that exercise over. So best tempos for this, I would say, would be 2 seconds down, just for control, 1 second pause or no pause at the bottom, 1 second up, and then no pause at the top. So a 2-0-1-0 tempo. And the reason why I generally like to prescribe that tempo too is because of the instability component. When you make this super slow for people, I think it makes it way too much of a stabilization exercise and you can't get through the repetitive patterns. So the negative consequences of doing this specific pattern for, like, say, an 8-0-1-0 for 4 reps is that people have to do it so slow, they're basically just focusing the entire time on trying to stay stable. Instead, so what would that, just an example, 8-0-1-0, 9 seconds for 4 reps, that's 36 seconds. Why not do 12 reps at 2-0-1-0? So it's still 36 seconds, but you've done 12 repetitions of the eccentric-concentric action. So I'd much rather you have much higher repetitions per side, per person for that. Same idea, back to the individualizing of it. If it's unstable, give them lots of repetitions, lots of time under tension. The rest periods between, as I'll leave that for you because that's based upon the client and their advancement of their movements. I'll quickly review the 4 points you have to be good at. Hip flexion movement is similar, both sides. That pelvis has to tip the same way per leg. You can't have rotation or protraction, retraction when you're holding the dumbbells, and you want to have an active foot. 2-0-1-0 is best tempo, higher time under tension, higher repetitions per side, low rest period, but rest between legs, unless you're going to do a right leg, left leg, big break, another movement that doesn't affect the core or the brain, and then come back and go right leg, left leg again, and you can put those exercises together. So that's called the Single Leg Dumbbell RDL. There's more pieces to it, but I think you got a bunch of things there you can take away and start playing with that exercise with some clients. Good luck.